shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you?
So last summer, the Supreme Court, 6 Catholics, 6-3, decided that states can do whatever they want to abortion laws. In other words, make it impossible for a woman to get an abortion in that state. During that period of time, there were rumblings as to whether or not a woman could actually leave the state to get another abortion. And in the last 10 months, we've been trying to figure out exactly what this means. Well, recently, as you probably heard, a Texas judge ordered that the birth control pill that would allow women to actually end a pregnancy almost in the first 2 or 3 weeks after she had the pregnancy, had the symptoms and everything, she decided that that she wanted to end the pregnancy. Well, the judge said, no, you can't. A Washington state judge said, yes, you can. And now it looks like it's going to be heading to circuit courts and possibly the Supreme Court. Well, joining us right now is Lizz Winstead. She is an activist on abortion rights, a very funny comedian, and the founder of The Daily Show. Good to have you here, Liz. And of course, it's great to see you. And it's difficult times. It seems like every time I bring you on, we're talking about the end of the world. But
I know, and you're always like, she's a great comedian, and I'm always like Debbie Downer.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that looking back on last summer's decision to allow states to impose severe restrictions on access to abortion, it seemed to me that the pill would be next, because now we had a federal judge in Texas essentially say that the pill couldn't be distributed anywhere. And then a judge in Washington who said, no, you're wrong. It seems like it's going to be fast tracked to the Supreme Court. What is everybody saying? I mean, and before we get to this, the next aspect of this, which offers some hope, what are they saying right now?
So it's a two-pronged situation. So the thing I think people need to know is that the anti-abortion consortium that brought this case formed 4 months ago. They're anti-abortion physicians who I don't believe have any standing, because I looked at every single member of this organization in leadership, and it's all men with the exception of a few women who are of not reproductive age, and they're all quote unquote pro-life. So they're never going to prescribe the pill. So what is their standing as doctors? They can't use it. They can't prescribe it. But they purposely put it into this judge's court, federal court in Texas, because this judge comes from an anti-abortion law background. And it also, if any ruling appealed from this guy, goes to the Fifth Circuit, which is the most conservative lower court in the country that has not been a friend to abortion. So we're going to hear from the Fifth Circuit by noon tomorrow, more than likely, on this ruling. The ruling was last week. They have 7 days to do it. No matter what the ruling is, it's going to go to the Supreme Court, because if the Biden administration gets their way, the plaintiffs who brought this court are going to bring to the Supreme Court, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So when the Washington case came an hour after, and the judge out of Washington did it, we have to remember that case was brought by 17 attorneys general around the country. So if that's a positive case, that case only applies to the 17 states who brought the case before that Washington judge. And what those 17 attorneys general said was, we think that you shouldn't listen to this ruling, and we need you to keep a stay on the 2000 decision to make mifepristone legal, and we want to keep it legal. So that would
give me the pronunciation on that again. I always butcher it.
Mifepristone.
Mifepristone. Okay.
Yeah, it's part of the 2-part regimen with the pills that has been sanctioned by the FDA, which is 1 pill of mifepristone you take orally, and then within 24 hours, you take 4 tablets of another pill called misoprostol, which you put underneath your tongue and embed into your cheeks, and that dissolves into your system. And then within usually around 24 to 48 hours, you will have a natural miscarriage. So the first pill detaches the fertilized egg embryo from the uterine wall, and the second pill opens up so that you expel it. So that's how medication abortion works.
Okay, so I mean, here's the thing, though, that attacking the pill is then almost implying that it's a human being at a zygote level, right?
Well, and the judge, which is so fascinating. So a couple things also, when this pill has been approved in France in 1988. So Europe has been using this pill up to a longer gestational age for 12 years before it was even approved in the United States. So from 88 to 2000, Europe had been using it up to 12 weeks. In 2000, when that pill, 100 peer-reviewed studies, let's be clear, on the approval, took 4 years, right, to get it approved. Just so you get an indication of other medications, from patent to approval on Viagra, 2 years. From patent to approval. So, and this pill has been used now for 23 years. Chip, 28 cases of death related to. They can't even necessarily say directly related to, but related to, of the use of this pill in over 5 million people using it. So that's the status of where we're at.
So I mean, one of the things, there's a lot surrounding here to unpack, yes. and one of the first is that this pill is routinely given to women who've been raped, and because obviously you've been raped, you don't want to carry a rapist's child, right? Yeah. Or you don't want to get pregnant, or whatever reason you have. You don't have to have a reason, but apparently in states like Texas now, if you've been raped, you can't get access to this pill. And I've said this before. Again, if you follow the logic of the anti-abortion crowd, and it's actually, it's not like a secret. They're not whispering it. They believe they have autonomy over the woman while the woman is pregnant.
Right.
In other words, restricting her movement, restricting who she can see. And believe me, you and I both know states are stockpiling these pills right now, and these pills can come in. One of the stories that I wanted to get to was how literally just changing the labeling on some of these pills can get them to states and to people who really need them, and also particularly in states that they can't get abortions.
Well, and people also need to know that both of the regimens of this pill are also used for other things. Miscarriage management. Misoprostol has a bunch of uses for autoimmune deficiencies, some arthritises, and things like that. And so I think what folks might not know too is this push towards getting rid of it. There are now states proposing that you can't have these pills in your state, which is even different than saying it's banned from use. So that means if you need miscarriage management, this is not available to you. Where are you going? When you look at places like Idaho has had literally shut down obstetrics departments in their hospitals because they just can't practice anymore. They just said, we're just going to shut this down because we're too terrified to do anything or to treat anyone who is having a problematic pregnancy, because we might be jailed if we try to assist them, or lose our licenses, or pay a $250,000 fine. So yeah, so trying to do this with the pill, it's interesting because when the pill was first put on the market, you were only able to use it up until 7 weeks of pregnancy. And as anybody knows, you normally don't find out you're pregnant until around 4 or 5 weeks. So that means there's a 2-week window. That was expanded to 10 weeks 5 or 6 years ago. And so when we're talking about a 10-week pregnancy, we're talking about the earliest of pregnancies. This regimen of pill is the number one way people access abortion right now. 53% of all abortions in the nation are done with this pill. And it is very easy to self-manage your own abortion with this pill, which is why they're going wild and trying to ban it, because it is putting healthcare ultimately in the hands of where it should be, which is the patient that needs the care.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because when you talk about self-management, obviously this is not what they want, because they thought, at least the early part of this we'll threaten doctors who perform abortions with draconian sentences, possibly even the death penalty in states like Georgia, where they proposed it, even Texas as well. Mm-hmm. But let's back up a little bit and talk about the momentum that brought us here. Yeah. It preceded the latest 3 Catholics to be put on the court by Trump. because some of these judges, like the judge in Texas, has been around for a while, and some of these federal appointees and some of these lower, again, whether it's a district judge or it's just a federal judge in one of the 9 districts in the country, I believe.
No, I think you mean like circuit court judges?
Circuit court judges?
I think there's 13.
13, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at the picture and looking backwards and the kind of momentum that's taken us to this point. I wonder now, had Ginsburg, had Obama and Ruth Bader Ginsburg seen it, and I wonder if it's already, though, that the anti-Roe v. Wade thing through the Catholic Church and through some of these other conservative evangelical groups already had enough momentum that this is just icing on the cake in the Supreme Court. I mean, that abortion has been under attack literally since 1973.
Yeah, and so now are all roads that would lead to protecting abortion access. We've seen ballot initiatives do very well in Kansas and in Montana and in Kentucky, Michigan. Now, what they're trying to do is either in states like Mississippi, they're saying you can't put abortion into a ballot initiative. They're trying to pass that law. And states like Ohio, who has a ballot initiative coming up, they're trying to put a ballot initiative 2 months before that ballot initiative goes on that says you have to have a 60% majority on a ballot initiative. So they're trying to gain
super majorities now for ballot initiatives.
Exactly correct. So they're just trying to game the system in so many ways. And like you said, the court system is stacked. There's a reason that Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana have been in the forefront constantly of these abortion battles. And that's because it lands in the Fifth Circuit, which is where this is going to land also. So their judge shopping is nothing new for either side. Right. But judge shopping and then circuit court shopping is something that the anti-abortion movement has done with profound regularity so that it can go through a court system and end up where it is. And with this Supreme Court, it's going to be really interesting to see the standing on this because...
Well, also, Liz, not just the standing, but they also have to understand that should they decide that the states have a right or the federal, the FDA's authority is in question here too, obviously.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Right. But the other side of this is that if the Supreme Court, I don't know what that decision would look or sound like. If they say that the pill, a state has a right to ban the pill in their state, that's one thing. But for a federal judge to come out and say that the pill, in effect, they're going past the 10th Amendment. The Supreme Court would be saying that, yes, that the U.S. Constitution is going to recognize that a zygote is a human being, and that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Well, this is what they've been trying to do always, is establish personhood, right? And so, Brett Kavanaugh wrote, as he often does, he writes these side opinions. As he wrote in the Dobbs decision, he said, we are not banning abortion. We are giving it back to the states to do that. But now we're talking about a federal judge who's deciding for the states. So which is it, right? And also, this is even more.
Hold on real quick. Wouldn't your first thought be that then even with the 6-3, these 6 Catholics, in your first thought that they don't want a federal judge in Texas to usurp the progress that they're making, and that they would back the Washington State judge who said that states still can have access to these pills, or at the very least that states that want to allow access to these pills can do that.
Yeah, it also opens up a whole can of worms about delegitimizing the authority of the FDA, because the medical community profoundly needs the FDA. They profoundly need a guiding force that is the place that is doing the studies that people can trust and go to, so that there can be innovation in healthcare, so that there can be all these things. And so you take abortion medication out of the equation and you undermine the authority, and any federal judge can decide that any pill that they deem they don't like is that HRTs for trans people. Is that, is that vaccines for COVID because the person's a COVID denier? Like, at what point then will the federal judges be reined back? And at what point and where does the medical community go and have assurance that the work they're doing is solid and solidified?
Unless you're making your decisions based on religion, I don't see how you can continue down this path.
Right.
Right. I mean, especially if you're talking about the idea of possibly banning contraception, because if you or vasectomies or tube ties, whatever. Again, if you start going down that road about right now it's just women's bodies, but I can see where, given enough freedom and enough, I guess opportunity, that they would do this for men as well. They would tell men that, sperm is protected. I know this sounds crazy, right? So maybe
they're doing it for everyone now. I just always like to reiterate that it's not just women that have abortions. There's non-binary people, there's trans men. And so when we talk about,
but I mean I agree with you that this is more complicated than that. But right now, this is just the very basic issue of whether or not a woman. I mean, have there been any prosecutions since last summer's decision of women who have had abortions?
Yeah, there have been prosecutions. Yes, there have been people who have been turned in by who have gone to emergency rooms and said, "I've taken the abortion pill," and have been turned in to the authorities by healthcare providers.
In what states? I mean,
Texas.
just in Texas. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And just so your listeners know, and this is really important thing to know, is when you take the abortion pills orally, it cannot be detected in your system. So if you were to take the abortion pill,
really?
Yes, it's a very important thing to know that unless you volunteer the information, the way that it manifests in your bloodstream, it is not detected. So if you went in hemorrhaging or felt like you needed to see medical care because you have taken this regimen, you can simply say, I feel I'm having a miscarriage. And that is what you should say when you go in.
Well, it's interesting you say that, though. I mean, I think that when we started allowing for swabbing of DNA, I think we put the Fifth Amendment on notice that we can actually, take part of you to use to testify against you, right? Which is an extension of, and I've heard arguments that that's exactly what, the involuntary taking of DNA from somebody is.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, it solved a lot of crimes, and it's one of those, quandaries, kind of philosophical, theological, smoke a joint and talk about it late at night, places to go. But right now, I mean, we're talking about, I've been reading that we're down about 5,000 abortions a day in the United States since last summer.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what's happening to those children that are being forced to come into a world of poverty, of abuse, of, again, in some states where, we know that these red states can least afford this kind of publicity because people aren't going there anywhere. Businesses are leaving there.
Right.
And, I wonder what, I mean, this is what this whole point of this discussion for me is what's the next step? I mean,
it can get scary because the truth is, if you're in a state and, all these fake clinics are popping up, these government funded, religiously funded, anti-abortion centers that look like they may be a place that would help you get abortion. If you go in there, their whole purpose is to talk you out of it, right? So they're taking data from you. And so let's say you're in a red state, right? And let's say you go to an anti-abortion center that's run by Christians that is hell-bent on you not having an abortion. You fill out all this paperwork. Since they're not a real clinic, they don't have to adhere to
back that up. So you're in like Texas and you go where?
There are these clinics that are everywhere that are fake abortion centers. They are funded by tax dollars in many cases. In Texas, $125 million went to them. Same with Tennessee, all over the place.
Okay.
They purport and advertise, and their websites say pregnant, need help, but they don't provide health care. They'll do a pregnancy test. They'll give you counseling that's religious. They'll talk about abstinence-only programs. They don't give any prenatal care. They give nothing, right? So you're fooled. They're in
Well,
lab.
wait. What if my blood pressure was high? What if I was a high risk for having
They
children?
don't take your blood pressure there.
So they know nothing about your physical.
They're not
level.
doctors. They're not doctors. They
Okay.
wear lab coats. It went to the Supreme Court in a case called Nifla v. Becerra. They brought these places to the SCOTUS in 2017. I was down at the courts. The Supreme Court ruled your First Amendment right to lie to people and dress up in costumes as doctors is covered if you are not providing actual medical care.
Wow.
So what happens is they collect your data. They put it into a national database because a lot of these places are national consortiums. If you're in a state and they decide to report that you came in and that you tested positive for pregnancy, because they'll do a dollar store pregnancy test on you, and then you never had a kid because maybe you went out of state to have an abortion, they could technically take that information and hunt you down and charge you for having an abortion.
Okay, so let's flip this around let's for just a second.
Lot.
It's
That's
insane.
a whole show.
That is a whole show.
Break it down.
I didn't know that. I mean, but it doesn't surprise me at all because I remember there were things like that Birthright. Remember that group that was out back 30 years ago?
So what I'll tell your listeners real quick is we started a website to combat this that explains what they do and how you can fight back called exposefakeclinics.com. Check that out because it will be very.
I'll put that in on the end of this when we put it out. All right. That's, of course, Lizz Winstead, activist, comedian, founder, and creator of The Daily Show. And just
Abortion Access Front is my organization.
What's it called?
Abortion Access Front.
Got it. All right. Joining us right now is Dr. Art Caplan. He is the creator of the Division of Bioethics at New York University's Langone Medical Center, and sent me a link to, as he always does, great stuff. And it's been a real science mentor of mine the last 5 years throughout this mess of pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. Art, I got a bounce back. I was just telling Liz this before the show. I had COVID last week, and then I started testing positive again yesterday. So, but I don't feel as bad as I did when I got it. So, whatever. I'm alive, right? Like a million other people that aren't in this country. Hey, let's talk a bit about this Boston Globe article that you sent me about abortion pills. And is it all, say the word again for me, Liz?
Mifepristone.
Mifepristone. Okay. Tell me about the story in the Globe and the significance it means to people who need this pill in states they can't get it.
Well, this drug has been approved for about 20 years. By the way, it was reapproved in 2016. So it's been under very close scrutiny in terms of side effects or dangers to women who take it. And it's safer than Tylenol, is all I can tell you. There's no side effects here. But a plaintiffs group, anti-abortion group, went judge shopping and found a judge in Texas who is so strongly anti-abortion that what he said was, I don't think the process for approving this drug as safe was done properly, and I'm going to order that the FDA revisit and re-examine this drug.
By the way, that judge calls fetuses prehumans.
That's right. That's right. I mean, he's way over on the pro-life end of the world.
Right.
But in any event, he's not way over on the science end of the world because he doesn't know what he's talking about. And this thing has been approved twice, and the evidence of, how women tolerate it over the past 20 years is excellent. So it's just a plot to sort of throw a monkey wrench into the availability of abortion pills. About half of abortions today are done by pharmaceutical abortion. It's the safest way to do it is to use that drug and another cousin drug. We don't have to go into the details, but basically it's a 2-drug thing, and it works.
I covered all that for you.
You got all that? Okay.
I got you.
Long and short of it, what I said was, okay, look, if you want to play games, I'll play games. Here's a game. One of the things that we have a right to in America is if your doctor has a drug that's approved for something, he or she can prescribe it for anything. So turns out this drug is also approved for some rare conditions like Cushing's syndrome, which you never heard of, but it doesn't matter. It's got approval for that. Any doctor can then write the prescription off-label for use for an abortion. And so I'm saying, okay, conservatives, you love this, what's called off-label prescribing power. All the think tanks on the right are always saying, yes, get the government off my back. I don't need a nanny state. I shouldn't need permission. It's between my doctor and me. Okay, great. I'm on board. So it's between your doctor and you. The thing has approval for something else. We're good. Let's start just shifting over to making it available on other grounds and, if you will, hoist conservatives on their own moral petard, because they're the ones who've been yakking about off-label use forever.
Hey,
so we'll see a spike in Cushing's.
Yeah,
What?
it'll be a
Wild
plague. It'll be a
Wild
plague.
spike in Cushing's.
Yes.
Cushing sounds like that sport where they what is the sport in the Olympics where they push the thing down the ice? Curling, yeah. Let me ask you something here. Who's the major manufacturer of these? Is it a U.S. company or is it? Are they?
It's a company called Danco here who makes the mifepristone is the generic, and Mifeprex is the brand name that Danco makes. There's other. I think another or a company called Genpro.
Even Pfizer makes a little bit.
Yeah. But it's also just worth reiterating so people can understand that they have been using this in France since 1988. So Europe has been doing this 12 years before it was ever even approved here. People were using it safely and using it up to 12 weeks in Europe, where when we approved this pill, it was up to 7 weeks, up until 2016 with the reevaluation. And then it was reevaluated to use up to 10 weeks.
And by the way, Liz, just on the reevaluation front, that was all political too.
Yes.
People stepped in and said reevaluate. So they did reevaluate. So why would a Texas judge have any expertise, knowledge about FDA science process? To which the answer is he wouldn't. And
right.
So this is completely ridiculous. It's undermining. I mean, all my friends in the pharma industry are freaking out because what it means is if you let this go, then anybody who doesn't like a particular drug for whatever reason could step in and say, oh, well, it's not really approved properly by the FDA. Let's pull it and revisit it. It puts all of our drugs at risk.
And also, I just want to say, too, that the classification of this drug is in this freakishly difficult classification that these 17 attorneys general who filed this case in Washington are also saying not only keep it as is, but we need to relax the regulations on it because the regulations on this drug are also really political.
Okay. So but at the crux of all of this comes the death of nuance over the last 5 years in this country, right? I mean, you can't have a conversation with anybody today, especially people that voted for Trump or simply enamored by just this on-off sort of mentality that there's nothing in between that. So at some point, the Supreme Court, I believe this Catholic Supreme Court is going to have to, somehow nuance this area where life begins thing, right? And to me, it seems like the only place they can possibly go to satisfy that base, that group, is to say a conception. If in fact that's what they do, I mean, what other decision can they make?
I happen to agree that life begins at conception. There are two other things that need to be said, though. Not every conception begins a life. The failure rate of conception to making babies is probably 50%. So it's hard to argue that every conceptus is alive because most of them, a large number are going to fail. They won't develop. They're miswired or they have other problems. And the other difficulty is life begins at conception, but personhood, moral standing, being a moral agent does not. I mean, here's a simple fact. In the hospital, we say you're dead when your brain has totally stopped working. Why wouldn't we say you're alive when your brain has totally started working? That happens at about 20 weeks.
Well, also, too, conception isn't a medical term.
Yeah.
So let's be clear about that. And also, from the time the sperm touches the egg, it's a 72-hour process where implantation happens into the uterus. And there's an actual pregnancy gene a hormone that starts when that happens. So to say pregnancy begins or life begins, before a pregnancy begins, yeah, sure, it's a life, but sperm is life. A lot of things are life. Cancer has its own unique DNA. Like, they say all this garbage that just sounds good, and then no one challenges it.
I worry about the momentum of this. When you're at sea and a tsunami goes underneath you, it's barely detectable. It's only when it reaches the land, when it causes the kind of damage and destruction that we see. I believe that if we're not cognizant of what's around the corner soon, then we have the possibility that this court could move down this road. They've already given states. Think about what they've said to states about with abortion. What is the reasoning behind that? So they're saying that states can outlaw abortion, but they didn't really say why.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They just gave them that power. So if we all conclude that the power they gave the states is one that supersedes the 10th Amendment, that is part of the U.S. Constitution's protection of all these rights, that then a zygote then is a human, a person, then you can just continue that process. In other words, that means you own a woman's reproductive system. The state does.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I want to say that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about, but that I think is super important, and that is part of the reason that they really hate the abortion pill, and we talked about it briefly, but I want to expand on it, is that it puts the power of the abortion in the hands of the person having that abortion. 5.2 million Americans have used medication abortion. They've been through the process on their own. They know exactly what they have terminated. They've seen it. They look at it. It's all advised when you have a medication abortion. So the bullshit rhetoric that they try to say they're ripping from limb and all this other garbage that they have won on, right? This scary shit.
Right. Yeah, not only that, Liz, I'll add to that. You can't go demonstrate at a clinic because there is no clinic. You're doing it privately in your home. It also means that every doctor can prescribe, not just an abortion doctor. And so a lot of their efforts have been, you got to have a hospital and you got to have all this equipment and you got to have this and that. Well, that all goes out the window. So they are terrified of pharmaceutical abortion. I agree.
Yeah, but 5.2 million people are now the experts.
Yeah.
And the people who've never, that's, I think, huge, right? So those who have experienced these abortions, those who have been through them, no longer are now the experts and can challenge all of this anti-abortion rhetoric with personal facts. And the Biden administration and the people who have the comfortability to tell their stories, Biden administration needs to talk to people who've had these abortions, and the people who've had these abortions, if they are able to, need to come forward and start claiming the narrative so that they don't have it.
I agree. The other important point, and you made it, it's been used in Europe even longer. It's not like the only place that's approved it or the only place that has experience is us.
That means nothing to Republicans, Art. I mean,
what I mean is this.
I know,
you could see, again, efforts made to ship in drugs. What's one of the conservatives' favorites? Bring me drugs from outside the country to save money. Okay.
But also, too,
okay.
if the Alliance for Defending Freedom, who, by the way, the lead attorney on this fucking case is Josh Hawley's wife, by the way, if they're bringing forth studies from Finland, forth the fact that they've been using it safely in France since 1988.
Ginny Thomas.
One other thing, Chip, just to get to your point about, life begins at conception. And we've pointed out, by the way, that conception is not an event, it's a process. And so they haven't even told us where in the process life begins, but that's technical. Put it on the side. The law would certainly begin to look pretty interesting when an embryo had the same status as you and me in terms of inheritance, in terms of homicide charges, in terms of things like in vitro fertilization, fertility.
That doesn't matter, though, Art. Once they get to the point that they say that a zygote is a human being, then look, I don't want to offend either one of you, but 320 million Americans believe there's some big guy in the sky with a beard that controls everything. Okay. And so dealing with religion and what happens on Sundays, in these churches and the things that are told. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen pastors in the South calling for the death of homosexuals and that kind of stuff. So this is, I think it's all on the table here. And and if I were a woman, and I'm pissed off now, but if I were a woman, I mean, when my wife went down to that rally after Trump's inauguration, and she was standing shoulder to shoulder, she had some hope. She had, but we've seen in the past 6 years since then, 7 years now. And, there's still the potential that this guy could be president again, and that we could have a Supreme Court and a Congress. They were all Republicans. I mean, I'm gone. If that happens.
Yeah. No, I understand. Nonetheless, the consequences get crazy. I mean, you start to have people say, well, you can't do infertility treatment anymore because you're going to destroy embryos, and it becomes outlawed. And let me say this. One thing I know about the United States is the rich get heard. You start taking away their rights to do things.
Oh, they'll always have abortions, though.
Exactly.
You know that.
Exactly.
So where do we go? I mean, what's going to happen? Obviously, this is going to be fast tracked to the Supreme Court. What's the timetable look like that on Liz? What is it?
I mean, the timetable is going to be, we don't necessarily know yet because we're going to see what happens with the Fifth Circuit. We'll see. I don't think the Supreme Court is going to take this as a fast track because I think it's a powder keg. But I do think in the meantime, every single clinic in America is going to be needing to talk to their lawyers to find out, can you use the stock you have of mifepristone? Will you go to a misoprostol only regimen for care, which is effective, but not as it's a little bit more painful because it doesn't allow for the entire regimen to happen, but it's safe and it's effective. And I think that we'll see how the 17 attorneys general's case is in Washington, and if it's those 17 states can dispense and disperse and do what they want. Those states should be stockpiling like Massachusetts and California are, and Washington State, so that they can be providing care for people.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, again, a blue and a red division. I think a lot of the blue states are going to say, I don't care what the Supreme Court says about this. I don't care what this Texas judge says about this. We're prescribing. Come get us. And who's going to come get them?
And I think what we need to look out for, too, is that, states have the authority to make laws on how unapproved drugs are dispensed in their state. So if it goes that the FDA says, fuck you, this is an unapproved drug and we're not yanking it off the market because we have that right to do that. I bet your life, red states are going to be clamoring to create laws that say we won't prescribe. But what does that mean? What other drugs are they selling right now that they do? And that's and that's going to be a whole. That's
why I wrote that column basically saying, you go down that road, it's trouble, red states.
That's right.
There's a ton of people getting stuff off label, and you're going to shut them all down and ain't going to be happy.
That's right.
Is there a political upside to this, Liz?
I mean, yeah, I think we're seeing that Americans want this pill accessible. And that goes across party lines. And it goes back to the fact that having abortions is not a political issue. People have abortions. And it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. If you need an abortion and you want one privately, right?
Right.
If they're taking your moral hypocrisy away, like, you're going to think about that, right? It's like, oh, I can have this abortion in my house and be right out there protesting against abortion. Nobody's going to know I'm the hypocrite. Mm-hmm. That's going to sit with people.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Liz, give everybody your website again, please.
It's Abortion Access Front is the organization, aafront.org. And on all the socials, we're Abortion Front.
Okay. And you can find Lizz Winstead, 2 Z's. Yep. On Twitter. You can track her down easily. Liz, thank you so much. Dr. Art Caplan, again, the creator and founder of the Division of Bioethics, New York University's Langone Medical Center. Thank you so much, Doc. Always
great.
Doc.
It's so good to hear from you.
You guys be well. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye. All right, there you go. Frightening. It's again, I remember the first time I read The Handmaid's Tale and just the impact it had on me. And that's what we're looking at right now moving forward. All right. Please subscribe to our channel at Really American. We appreciate you being here. You can follow us on Twitter at Really American 1 or at Chip Franklin. Till next time, I'm Chip Franklin. We'll see you then.
We shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you?